Welcome to A Dram of Outlander. This is Desiree, your podcaster and the writer for adramofoutlander.com. For all things Outlander, from the Dinah Gabaldon book series to the Starz TV series and everything in between. This is episode 85, The Scottish Prisoner, week 17. Welcome back. It's you, me, and a book. So when we closed out the last chapter, John was seriously injured and wanting to be taken home to Argus House. So when we arrive at chapter 33, which is called Billets Doux, which means love letters, we find him quite alive, and he's recovering. And here's the first words of this chapter. If the blow had gone between your ribs, you'd be dead, you know. John has heard this more than once already, and he really didn't have any strength to reply to it. He knows. Dr. Hunter said it first, then Dr. McGuire, who was the Greys' family physician, and finally Dr. Latham, who was the regimental surgeon. He had been struck in the third rib, then sliced sideways for 2 or 3 inches before the tip of the saber had stuck in the bone of his sternum. It really hadn't hurt at the time. It's called adrenaline. Hal asks him if it hurts much, and he tells him to get off the bed. But Hal didn't move. So he knows that John is in his right mind at this point. He came to tell John that Twelvetrees had died. God rest his soul. He'd known pretty certainly that Twelvetrees would die. There was really no way to recover from such a serious abdominal wound, and he'd felt his sword strike bone somewhere deep inside. He'd gone through the man's guts entirely. Blood loss and shock might do him in any way, but infection definitely would. It was pretty jarring to John, nonetheless, hearing the finality of his duel. So he asks if his brother Reginald has sent demand for John's head or his arrest. John shook his head. Nope. He can't do anything because everyone thinks that Edward was a traitor. John's being hailed pretty much as a public hero. So John is pretty shocked by this. Well, apparently John had exposed Bernard Adams as a Jacobite plotter 2 years prior, and then Jamie had stood up in what he had said publicly about Twelvetrees at the beefsteak. The public en masse believes that John challenged Twelvetrees because of his treasonous behavior. But John, of course, didn't. That's not why. Then Hal tells him, well, I know you didn't, ass. But as you didn't take out a notice in the newspaper saying he'd called you a pederast, and you took exception to it, and he didn't take out a notice saying he thought you were a menace to society and proposed to support his opinion by force of arms, the public has, as usual, made up its own mind. We learn that Gray's left arm is in a sling, and then he realizes that the newspapers have gotten a hold of it. Oh, and Hal finds this funny, because Minnie has saved a few copies of the better ones for him. Ha. Well, John has a few things to say to Minnie when he feels up to it, that's for sure. He asks John if he's hungry. They're trying to feed him terrible, bland food. John wants real food. And so Hal decides to see what's available. And he looks at John and says, I'm glad you're not dead. Wasn't sure for a bit. Hal leaves, and John's eyes tear up. He was trying to convince himself that he wasn't moved by Hal being glad he was alive. But there was a distraction. There was noise in the hallway. It was small boys attempting to be quiet, loud whisperings and shushings, with shovings and bumpings into the wall. He calls them in. Hello, Ben, what's ado? Benjamin was very happy to see his uncle. "You all right, Uncle? Mama said of the sword." "I know I'd be dead, but I'm not now, am I?" So the boys come in. We have Adam and Henry and Benjamin, and they want to leap on the bed, which they all got on, but they had to prevent Henry from jumping on John's lap. They want to see where the sword went in. Oh, little boys always want to see scars and wounds. So John unbuttoned his shirt and detached the bandage, and his nephews admired it in awe. Ooh. And Benjamin had to lean forward to look at it more closely even. And John thinks it was a pretty impressive wound. He had to admit that. So he had a 6-inch gash across his already scarred left side of his upper chest. Ben asks if it hurts. Not so bad. And his leg is itching, much worse, and they want to see it. So they pulled back the blanket and lifted his nightshirt, and they got to see the slash across the top of his thigh. Though it was a shallow wound, it was impressively long, and while it did still hurt a bit, he had been honest saying the itching was worse. And so a couple of the doctors were arguing over what they should do with this wound and if it needed a poultice or not, or just dry air. John basically let them decide, but he had massive gratitude that Dr. Hunter had not come to give his opinion. He would have probably whipped out his saw and made off with his leg, and that would have settled the argument. And he thinks that he has some more sympathy now that he's reacquainted himself with the good doctor about Tobias Quinn and his horror of being anatomized after his death. John's nephew, Adam, observes, "You've got a big willy, Uncle John." And he's so polite. About the usual for a grown man, I think. Though I believe it's given fairly general satisfaction. The boys sniggered. Though probably only Benjamin understood it. And then Adam perks up and tells him that their mama says he killed the other man, and he wants to know where he stuck him, in the belly. And then Benjamin pipes in, "Colonel Quarry said the other man was an unconscionable tick." Unconscionable? Yes, I suppose so. I hope so. And now he's talking about the reasons for the duel, and the boys were listening. They wanted to know how much blood there was, how many times Uncle John had stuck the bad fellow, what they'd said to each other. "Did he call you vile names and utter foul oaths?" "Foul oaths," Henry murmured. "Foul oaths, foul oaths." John doesn't think they really said anything to each other, and that's what the second is for. They didn't quite understand why. And at this point, the footman arrives with food. John is not happy. It looks like gruel and bread. So the boys ate the bread and milk. They were dribbling on the bed, and they were each trying to outdo the other, giving Uncle John news about the household. Nasenby, the butler, had fallen down the stairs, and his ankle was strapped up. And Cook and the fishmonger had an argument. So they had pancakes for dinner, and they pretended it was Shrove Tuesday. And Lucy the spaniel had her puppies in the bottom of the upstairs linen closet. And Mrs. Weston, the housekeeper, had a fit. I love how the boys would be relaying this information. And Uncle John asks if she had fallen down and foamed at the mouth. Probably. We didn't get to look. Cook gave her sherry, though. Oh. The two younger boys were cuddling against John's sides. They smelled sweet, and they were warm. And he thinks he might get tearful again. So to avoid this, John asks Ben to recite something for him. Ben has to think of it, and then he gives his rendition of the 12 Days of Christmas. But he is quickly interrupted by his mother coming in, followed by Pillcock with a second tray, with appetizing foods on it. She shushes the boys out of the room. Off with the lot of you. The boys are gone, and she looks down at John and shakes her head. And she looks charmingly domestic, he thinks. So she brings him the food he demanded. And if he dies or bursts or rots as a result, it will be his own fault. John tells her to thank Hal, thank Cook, thank everybody as he's happily eating this delicious food. Minnie looks happy. She loves feeding people. She sent the footman away, and she sits down on the bed, enjoying John eating. And she says Hal told her that John wanted to scold her about something. He said he just wanted a word with her. He said he did want to reproach her with sharing her insights regarding motives with Mr. Fraser, but she says, as it is, I was right about them. And she says, of course I was. And Mr. Fraser is no fool, and he probably didn't need telling anyway. He did ask her, though, why she thought he had challenged Edward Twelvetrees, so she told him. John wants to know where Mr. Fraser is at the moment. She thinks he's in Hal's library. So they're moving through this conversation. He's eating, they're just talking, and it's kind of a big non sequitur. Oh, and speaking of reading, she says, and she lifts a stack of letters out of her pocket. She lifts a small stack of letters off the tray and deposits them on him. They're blue and pink, and they smelled of perfume. And she says they are billets doux from his admirers. He's shocked by this. And how does she know what's in them? I read them, she said. And she explains to him that there are a great many women who are positively will swoon over men who fight duels. Oh, the one that survives. So he opens a letter with his thumb and held it in one hand, and his brows go up. I've never met this woman, yet she professes herself besotted with me. Well, she's certainly besotted, I'll say that much. Consumed with admiration for my valor, my excessive courage, my... Oh, dear. Are they all like that? He asks. She says some are much worse, and asks him if he never thinks of marriage. And that's the only way to stop this type of attention. He says no, he's never thought of marriage. That he should be a most unsatisfactory husband. And he keeps reading and thinks, Holy Lord, as he sees, I am enraptured by the vision of your valiance, the power of your puissant sword. Stop laughing, Minerva. You'll rupture something. This didn't happen when I fought Edwin Nichols. And she tells him, yes, it did. But he was away, so he didn't know about it. And then she asks him if he wants children, a son. And of course he has to say in his humor, like Jamie would, having just spent half an hour with yours, no. She knew this wasn't true. And she says that the public response to his duel with Nichols was more subdued than this one. They tried to keep it hushed up. Hal said that she shouldn't forward the letters to Canada, so she didn't. And he thanks her. Here, burn them. So she gives him one that he hadn't opened. He thinks she'd read them all. Only the female ones. This looks more like business, she said. It's from H. Bowles. Burn that one too, he says. He became revulsed. I like the domesticity of that chapter. It shows them in this real life, everyday element. The nephews, who will probably grow up to be soldiers themselves. Of Minnie, though she's wearing her cap and loves feeding people, you know she's still a relayer of information. She's still working behind the scenes. Of Hal, still brusque, but in his way telling his brother he loves him and he's glad that he's alive. And John is very bad at convalescing, apparently. And who is this H. Bowles, by the way? And the description of John's body, that he had already had a pretty significant scar in that same place. He's a soldier. So he's been in many battles. He's been on the front lines. He's been injured and damaged. He's seen so many horrible things. And he's courageous and he's strong. And now he's going to be left with this huge scar on his thigh and the huge scar on his chest. Now, Jamie has a horrible thigh scar from a bayonet, right? And the wound and the infection. And he also has many scars all over his body. These are men of action and intelligence. But I can imagine the beauty in their scarred bodies. They're not flawless like so many are today. Like, how many of us have minor notes on our body that show of things that have happened to us? Most of us do not have giant gashes. We've never been sliced by a sword. We've never been shot. When you look at these men, there are all sorts of wounds that have impacted their bodies and that they've recovered from. They tell their own story. Chapter 34. All heads turn as the hunt goes by. So Hubert Bowles, who was the H. Bowles, was a spy master. Gray had met him some years earlier, and he'd hoped he'd never meet him again. He didn't really want to find out what the man wanted with him. But he felt restored by the boys' visit and the meal, and how Tom would just appear with the regularity of a cuckoo clock. He wanted to make sure that John had not managed to die since his last inspection. He let Tom shave him and brush his hair out and plait it. And then he dared to stand up, clinging to Tom's arm. Tom tells him to take it easy. There was some dizziness at first, and he limps slowly, hanging onto Tom. You know, he wanted to make sure he was going to fall down or rip out the sutures from his leg. He knew if he was careful, it would be okay. And then he says he's going downstairs. And Tom is trying to get him not to. Wait, no, yes, be Lord. He says I'll go down in front of him. And John says, so I can fall on you? He doesn't think so. Tom can go down behind him and pick up the pieces if he likes. So John makes his way slowly down the main stairs, Tom behind him, muttering something about all the king's horses and all the king's men. But they made it downstairs and through the main hallway to the library, and he nods at Nasenby and asks about his bad ankle. Yep, there was Jamie. He was sitting in the library in a wing chair with a plate of biscuits and a decanter of sherry, and he was reading Robinson Crusoe. Jamie being camped in that library, having not had a book of his own for years, he's just filling up his brain. He's trying to give himself things to remember and recite. He looks up as he hears footsteps, and his eyebrows go up. Maybe he was surprised to see John up and about, or only astonished at his banyan, which was silk with green and purple stripes. He looks pretty fetching, I imagine. Are you not going to tell me that had the sword gone between my ribs, I'd be dead? Everyone else does. Fraser looks at him with a puzzled face. And Kent hadn't done that. You weren't dead when I picked you up. You picked me up? You asked me to, did you not? This was exasperating Jamie. You were bleeding like a stuck hog, but it wasn't a spurting out, and I could feel you breathing and your heart beating all right when I carried you back to the coach. Oh, thank you, he said, and in his mind he's thinking, damn it, couldn't he have waited a few moments longer to pass out? But it's a pointless regret. He takes a biscuit and asks if Jamie has spoken to Hal. Oh, he has. no more than an hour prior. And he tells John that Hal offered him a sum of money in reward for his assistance, as he was pleased to put it. And John says it's well deserved. And he hoped that Hal hadn't been an ass in the process. I told him it had the stink of blood money and I wouldn't have touched it. But he pointed out that I had not done what I'd done for money, and that's true enough. In fact, he said he'd force me to do it, which is not entirely true, but I was not disposed to argue the fine points, and that he'd wished to recompense me for the inconvenience to which he had put me. Rye looked to Grey. I said I thought this a Jesuitical piece of reasoning, but he replied that as I'm a papist, he supposed I could have no reasonable objection on those grounds. Hal continued to point out that Jamie was under no obligation to keep the money himself, and he could pay it out to anyone specified. And after all, there were still folk who were under his protection, were there not? Hal is speaking to the laird in Jamie. At this, Grey was silently prayerful. Hal wasn't an ass. And then Grey asks who Jamie thinks to help. His sister, her husband, the 6 bairns, the tenants. And Grey wants to know how many families had been under Jamie's protection. Maybe 40 families. He thinks that Hal must have come up with a lot of money. He rings for a drink from the footman, something that was not barley water. He was wondering if Hal had mentioned anything about the court-martial or the progress of the military operation. What he meant was, had there been arrests of the incriminated officers of the Irish Brigade? Jamie tells him the court-martial is set for Friday, and he wanted Jamie to remain in case his testimony is required. Now, this was not a great idea. This would make Jamie a marked man. If he testified, it's public. And there was no way to hide Jamie's part in the investigation of Syverley's affairs or the revelation of Twelvetrees' treachery. Yeesh. It would be easy to draw conclusions. And he feared that there would be revenge upon Jamie if he was found out. The other thought was that Jamie could go back to Hellwater so quickly. Even though there was no reason to keep him in London, he really didn't want him to go back so soon. And then Jamie brings up the military operation, the stopping of the rising, as it were. Here's what Jamie says. I believe it is satisfactory. I am naturally not in his Grace's entire confidence, but I heard Colonel Quarry telling him that there had been several significant arrests made yesterday. John wants to know if Mr. Quinn's name was among them. No, Jamie says. Are they Hunt and Quinn? All Grey can do is shrug and sip brandy. They do know of his name and his involvement, and also he is a loose cannon. He also likely knows who the members, or at least some of the members of the Wild Hunt are. And John asks if Quinn would make an effort to warn them, if he knew that they were exposed. And Jamie, says he would. Then he wants to know if Jamie knows where Quinn is. I wouldn't tell you if I did, but I don't. And then John wants to know if Jamie would warn him if he could. I would. He was once my friend. And John thinks so was I. Am I now again? But not even the most exigent curiosity would make him ask. I love how straightforward they are in conversation, how they will ask these patently blunt questions of each other and then not hold it against the other person what the answer is. They just want to know where they stand. Of course Jamie would. He would warn him. He would seek him out. And Quinn would warn the others if he could. But the fact that John doesn't take umbrage at this or see this as some kind of breach speaks to a different type of honor and loyalty that I don't think people understand today. People get their feelings hurt if you don't give them wholesale, blind fealty, right? Well, Jamie's not giving them blind fealty. He's loyal to the task at hand. I think he's even loyal to his friends in the betrayal because he's trying to keep the bloodshed down. He doesn't want another rising and failure like Culloden. But the fact that they can engage each other and have such divergent points of view and interests speaks volumes about who these characters are and how respectful they are. And they really both are men of deep honor and loyalty. And they're both exceedingly honest. So John is being hailed as a public hero, and largely in part to what Jamie did at the beefsteak, having that very public speech against Twelvetrees. He's calculating and politically savvy, and he knows how the social structures work. Nobody had to know that John sought out the duel because of the charge of being a sodomite. I wonder if Minnie knows why John would be a terrible husband. Is it his occupation? I mean, does she wonder about that? Does she wonder what his proclivities are? I mean, she had to have heard about Twelvetrees' accusation, right? I mean, her father is a dealer in intelligence, and Minnie is very good at it herself. And you know, she and Hal talk about pretty much everything. We learn that Hal, though pinpoint focused and the Crown's man, wanted to do something to repay Jamie for what he offered and what he did. And this will help set up Jamie's family. They will get through a winter. They will not have to leave the lands at Lollybrook. And Jamie comes out of this having done the right thing, the hard thing, the just thing. He's filling his mind with philosophy and other good books. He's not turning his back on those he cares for. And even a plan that might work, but he knows the future, right? Are he and John friends? The fact that John still oversees his parole, the fact that Jamie is still a prisoner of the Crown, the fact that he has nothing to his name. How about the fact that John didn't even know until he asked how many families that Jamie had been responsible for? He doesn't know as much about Jamie as he would like to, or he thinks he does sometimes. I think there's a respect, and they can call each other friend, but again, there's still that power differential, that authority gap that's constantly there. And even still, the idea that as an individual, Jamie measures up to an Englishman's honor, that on his own as a Scotsman, they would not think him honorable. Definitely some deep social biases. There's some class issues, and the issue of one being a prisoner and one being free. Those are all big deals to me. What do you think? I don't often ask in the podcast anymore, what do you think? But I still want to know what you think. Please email me at contact@adramofOutlander.com. Leave a voicemail on the listener line at 719-425-9444. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you want from me. Give me your insights and questions. I look forward to that. So where can you find A Dram of Outlander? Well, on Facebook, it's A Dram of Outlander page, or the group you have to ask to join for listeners, A Dram of Outlander group. We have Twitter and Instagram, which are Dram of Outlander without the A in front. Remember, Wednesday nights, there's a standing chat under the hashtag ADOO on Twitter, 6 p.m. Pacific Time, 9 p.m. Eastern, and we chat about the prior week's podcast. And how can you support the podcast? Well, share the podcast. Write a review on iTunes if you listen through there. Be active on the social media pages. And you can also, of course, financially contribute to the upkeep of the podcast by sending a one-time offering. And you could just contact me through email or go to patreon.com/adramofOutlander to sign up for a monthly offering of your choice. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, I appreciate you all. The podcast is growing, and it's exciting. And it's because of you guys, the listeners. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, Slán Java.